When I got the opportunity to play, step on the field, I think I enjoyed every moment of it, and that's what you really love about the game since I've been 6 years old. That was the beginning of starting football in a sense, organized, I should say. We were playing before then, but organized ball at 6 years old was awesome.
Welcome to Football IQ on the Coaching Coordinator Network. This series is about a part of football that matters as much as anything we do as coaches, and that's football IQ. We spend a lot of time talking about scheme, technique, drills, and game plans, but at the end of the day, the players who separate themselves and the teams that play the fastest are usually the ones that understand the game at a deeper level. They can recognize structure, process information, anticipate what is coming, and make better decisions in real time. That's becoming harder to teach. Players today see a lot of football, but they often see it in clips, highlights, and short segments on social media. They're watching plays, but not always learning the game in full context. That's why we wanted to build this series. With Football IQ, presented by American Football IQ, we're going to talk with coaches and teachers of the game about how they develop smarter players, how they train recognition and decision-making, and how they help athletes truly understand what they're seeing. If you want to help your players see the game more clearly and play with more confidence, check out our partner, American Football IQ. They're building tools and resources that help players, coaches, and parents grow their understanding of the game. The link is in the show notes. Let's get into today's episode.
Welcome to the Coaching Coordinator Podcast. This is a launch of our Football IQ series. Football IQ isn't just plays. It's anticipating defenses on offense, reading routes as a defender, spotting stunts or blitzes before they land. When everyone's fast and strong, the sharpest mind on either side of the ball wins. That's what we're exploring today with a true master. I want to introduce Will Shields. He's a Canton Pro Football Hall of Famer from the Kansas City Chiefs. He was a legendary guard from 1993 to 2006. He played 223 consecutive starts. He went to 12 Pro Bowls. He was first team All-Pro 3 times, and he was the NFL 2000s All-Decade team member. He anchored lines that powered Priest Holmes' record-setting seasons. He was inducted into Canton in 2015. Will, thanks for being here. How does it feel looking back on that era?
It's good, man. I enjoyed every minute of it. And when I got the opportunity to play, to get the opportunity to, step on the field, I think I enjoyed every moment of it. And that's what you really love about the game since I've been 6 years old. That was the beginning of, starting football in a sense, organized, I should say. We were playing before then, but organized ball at 6 years old was awesome.
Yeah, I think you mentioned something that I think is pretty important. Like you were playing before it was organized. And I think that's something that I want to see kids do more, right? Like I train quarterbacks, I work with teams. So a structured environment is something I come from, but I also think the love of the game is really built when you're just playing with your buddies. What do you think about that?
Yeah, because then you're sort of curtailing your own rules and you're learning how to play the game without the pads. So, we knew how to tackle guys without pads. So we could do it in a way that didn't hurt somebody, but still was safe, but still had a great time. And even if you did get a little tweaked, you weren't going to go home and tell mom because she wasn't going to let you play after that point. But, it started off simple, basically tackle the man with the ball and then touchdown kings. And then from touchdown kings to, hey, by the way, you can play organized football, and then you're trying to figure out what position you're going to be and how you're going to get there. And it was really cool trying to figure out, what was next. And, you had some of the skills that you built up by playing in the street, tag football and things like that sort of built your skills up to a point to where at least you were athletic enough to find a position on the field.
Yeah, I think, we get stuck in putting players in a box. We get stuck in the way that we develop players as well. I know we're going to dive into football IQ here in a minute, but, you mentioned something I think is really important. Learning how to tackle, right? Where there's no face mask on, you don't have a helmet on, and you've got to be able to get that player down. And I think, it's kind of naturally learning how to move and put yourself in a position to be successful is a good learning lesson, right? Without the overarching instruction. Obviously, we believe in instruction and doing it the right way, but I think that, just by doing, you can learn a lot, and that could be a great teacher.
Yeah, I think, some of the times when your kids when your parents just say, hey, go out and find people to play with, that makes it easier because then you got to figure out which game that you're going to play. Some guys were better at basketball than football, and some guys basically didn't want to play any sports at all. So you still had to find a way to get along and figure out what was next, where now you sort of can find your niche market through the internet some way or another. And then you're sort of stuck within that realm. And you never see where kids can try new things and do new things to find out what they're truly gifted at. I mean, yeah, you might be good at basketball, but you might be great at wrestling. You might be great at something totally different. And it's okay just to be good at something. And I think that's the hard part of people understanding is like, I don't have to be great at it, but if I'm at least good or decent at it, there's more things that I can do that on those days that I'm bored, I can figure out something else to do. And I think that's that hard part for a kid today is finding out what to do that's maybe outside that, you can make up games in your own mind and do different things without having to visually see it.
Love it. I know we can spend a lot of time on that element. Let me dive into some of the things I wanted to touch upon with you and then let you take it from there. Back to your rookie year, you had a decorated career at University of Nebraska. You started off from the jump and had success. What flipped the switch early on for you? Was there any moment where just blocking turned into reading the whole defense?
I think it really helped me. And actually, even before going to college, was in high school. Our sophomore going into our junior year, we went and did this football camp in Nebraska, and we were trying to figure out what we were going to do. So we were like, our coaches had just sort of connected with the guys from Nebraska because Nebraska didn't recruit us kids from Oklahoma that much at that point. So they used to come down and fish in Oklahoma, but they didn't necessarily fish for kids in Oklahoma. But our coaches became really close to each other, and they were like, you know what? We've got some talented kids on our team, and we think they would do well running Nebraska's offense using their off-season conditioning program, that kind of thing. And so then we just started doing their off-season program, and we put their offense in. And the cool thing about it is we put their offense in verbatim. Basically, every call, all the defenses, everything from top to bottom. So as a high school kid, I'm learning not only basic blocking of I got this guy, that guy, this guy. No, I had rules and rules to follow. So let's say we're running a simple play, which in our mind is a 44 ISO, just a play that's going to go straight down and get blocked and everything else. I mean, in high school, I'm learning right seam on, left seam, help center. Those are and like I say, it just comes back to your brain because you had to learn every one of those plays and what your rules were and where you're going to go and everything else. So that sort of opened my brain to like, does everything work this way on the field? How do you figure out who you're going to go to next? What's your rule? What's your next thing? What's your next step? And so between that and Coach Madden bringing us in and going, hey, you got this rule. What's your rule? What are you doing? How do you do this? And that sort of opened the pathways as far as learning the game in a whole different level. And it's sort of different because I did play offense and defense, but the offensive side made my brain work a lot differently than defense, And those rules is what I sort of gravitated to at that point.
I love it. Obviously we've got some connections from your Nebraska days. I ended up playing for Tony Samuel, who played and coached at the University of Nebraska, played for Barney Cotton and Boom. I coached with Tim McGuire. So there's a lot of names, right? And I remember, after the 2009 season, before the 2010 season, we had a magical year in 2010, right? But I think a big precursor was Coach Sams, who is a defensive guy, went into our offensive cut-up reviews, right? After the big recruiting season was over, before spring ball started. And he was asking questions about what's your base rule on this play? And our O-line coaches took about a minute to explain what the base rule was. And so if Coach Sams, right?
Oh, yeah. Coach Samuel was there, and me and Boom were actually teammates.
God rest his soul, man. That was my guy.
Great guy.
So Coach Sams is a very mild-mannered person, right? Very relaxed, probably the coolest guy in the room anywhere he's ever been, right? That type of person. And I remember that he got fired up, and that got our attention, and he said, I'm going to come back. And when I come back, I want there to be clearly defined base rules for our plays so that our players are able to go back to the basic building blocks and the foundation when things get fast during a game. I mean, that's really the goal. You want to be able to slow it down so that you can then play fast. And so I think that's a great story. I love hearing that because I have my own personal experience with that as well. And then, just knowing from Nebraska, I remember Coach Sams had his leather-bound books, that all the scouting reports that you guys had on the different teams, like he had them on his shelf. And so we went back and look at some of the option stuff. And it was really neat to do that. So yeah, that's great. What about your time in Kansas City, your time being a young NFL player? And was there any light switch that came on, anything you learned from a veteran that ended up helping you?
Yeah, there was a lot of cool things. It's actually trying to figure out, as being an offensive lineman coming from a run predominant offense to now figuring out what is pass protection from 101. We in our offense never had really a true drop back pass protection to where we could go, okay, you've got this guy, you could do this step, you could do that. All of ours were play action. It was always off the option look or something of that nature. So to me, that was the biggest curve I had to learn. I had to learn what one-on-one pass protection look like, being on the strong side versus the weak side, who's helping where, what footwork should you take to get there, what hand placements you need to take to get there. Those are all things that right now it's very hard and complicated. In my mind, it's not hard and complicated to teach, but it's understanding as if you're a coach that don't understand it, it's hard to tell the players how to understand it. And as an offensive coordinator, you've got to make sure that everything is that way, coordinated together to where they're opening seams and they're doing things that actually benefit. So to me, that was the biggest learning curve is pass protection. What do I do? Where do I put my feet? Where do I put my hands? How far can I take a guy or vice versa? How far can I actually, what I call it, losing slow? Can I lose slow enough to where the ball still gets out? So where is my room for error? And then where can I help? So to me, that was really the most important pieces of trying to figure those pieces out. So I had this agent. And actually, I had two agents when I came out. One of them is actually Kevin Warren. He works for the Chicago Bears right now. He's their president. And then I got Joe Lenta, which was and he's actually at that point, he was a financial guy just getting into the actual agent business. So me and Joe are playing one-on-one basketball. And he's explaining to me, it's like, okay, the goal is back here behind you, Will. This is the playing. And the goal is the quarterback. So imagine if you're going to do these things, you're going to use the goal as that key point of where you're trying to not let me go. So if you push me out this way, I have to shoot a 3-pointer, right? Yeah, exactly. That's the way it works. But then if I go back the other way, you want to push me back towards the free throw line. So then I'm always going back towards away from the basket that way. But if I go out, I can go out as far as I want as long as I'm not going towards the goal. And I was like, it can't be that easy. He was like, yeah, it is. It's that easy. It's like, you just got to look at it that way as the mirror and it works. He said, as long as you stay between me and there and we either go up when we go that way or we go back when we go this way, you pretty much won. And I go, no, man, you got to push him down. You got to do this. You got to do. He was like, no, negotiate space. Understand where you're going. Make sure he goes further out than you want him to. And if he comes back towards the middle, make sure he goes back towards his goal line and not your the goal line, and the quarterback can step up and make a play. So that was the beginning of me learning how to do pass protection. I ended up having a coach, Alex Gibbs. I call him the sensei. He's one of the gurus. Little bitty small guy, never played offensive line, but he learned the craft by asking the questions. And I think that's what most young players don't get in that point of where ask the question, what am I doing right here? What am I doing wrong? How do I figure this out? What exactly are you looking for? And what was really cool about Alex is that he taught me certain basic fundamentals and he goes, you're an athlete, you do this. After you do that, you just got to win. And that was one of his favorite things. You got to win. So he taught you the basics and the understanding of how to use certain hands and certain placements. But the whole point is like, I don't want the guy in here. There's a reason. There's a guy, I want him out here. There's a reason. And know where your help is coming from. So if you set where your help is coming from, that helps because guess what? You already know you got sideboards. And so that was what's really cool. And so they taught us that as it moved forward. And we ended up my rookie year having this guy named Joe Montana show up. And he is doing things offensively that I'd never seen before and making changes and plays and calling all kinds of stuff. And then I had this running back named Marcus Allen that would sit in our offensive line room and he would sit with us and ask questions. Hey, what can you do with this guy? Hey, what can you do with that? So it was a new teaching moment of learning how a team is supposed to come together and work off of each other to make it better. So it's not just you're not out there on your own. You're not out there as a guy that's by yourself. Everybody has a piece to play. It's just you understanding where the other pieces are. So you can use them as bumper pads if you have to. So if I am losing a guy inside, I know if I push him hard enough, I'm going to run him into my center. If I do X, Y, and Z and I'm losing on the outside, if I keep him pushing on the outside, I know the quarterback can step up. So you have to learn those little outs just in case, because guess what? Guy on the other side is good. He's doing great things. He's been taught. As a defensive lineman, I was taught how to beat those blocks, how to attack the outside shoulder and make sure it happens. When that shoulder disappears, make sure you peek backside just in case it's a trap. Those are the little nuances that they've learned. And then as an offensive player, you've got to learn the counters to them. And so I say the greatest thing ever for a player is to play both sides so that they know what the other person is trying to do. And that helps you understand the whole field as it grows.
That was awesome. I'd never heard the basketball analogy. Perhaps somebody maybe said it before, but the way you explained it makes perfect sense, right? Lose slowly. I think that's amazing. Being a quarterback coach and being somebody who played the position, has coached the position, we always try to teach quarterbacks to find the quiet part of the pocket. And another big piece of movement as a quarterback is only move as much as you need to, because when you displace where you're at, what does that do to the guys in front, right? It ends up changing the launch point, right? And ends up changing where the guys that they're going against that are amazing athletes, to your point, are going to go. And so that's where a holding could come in, where you move more than you needed to, right? And so that's a lot of great nuggets there, really appreciative of those sound bites. And I think a lot of coaches are going to get a lot of value out of that.
Well, and I think one thing you just said that was very important for offensive linemen is if your offensive coordinator can tell you where all the launch points are, that helps you on every protection. So what I used to do is write down launch points for every protection. If it's 200 jets, such and such and such and such, I know there might be a keyword down the road that, okay, it's not actually a short pass. It's 2+2. It's 2+3. It's he's moving here. Or I got a guy coming B gap rail and I've got the quarterback sitting there. Those are the little nuances that makes your life easier if you understand it. Because I know, hey, I can give this guy a one-way go and know that I'm going to have a guy hitting him in the ribs over here, and I could just push him out instead of over kicking him, letting him beat me underneath right to the quarterback where he's standing. And that's what makes the game a lot easier for some that can actually start figuring it out. I was even to the point to where I used to rewrite the playbook every year. I would rewrite it to a point to where I knew on specific classes, if we're running a smoke or we're just throwing it out there and it's press, I'm already calling touchdown before I block my guy. I was like, oh, that's a touchdown. He's gonna run the right route. He's gonna do this. But then, of course, on the other hand, when he runs the wrong route, you're going, oh my gosh, I got to get out there and try to help.
That's awesome. That's so good. And so, you just said something that caught my attention. As an offensive lineman, what was your process? Just generically, right? Like, let's just use the example you just gave of there being a quick screen out there. What was your process looking at the defense? What was your organized way that you looked at a defense? What was your visual mental checklist?
At one point, we would call the defense from the sideline. So we'd have one guy that would stand and watch. And when they subbed in, we would call out if it was dime, if it was nickel, if it was a 43, or if it was a 34, if it was a spinner. We would actually try to figure that out as they're running guys on and off the field. So one guy was sort of prone to do that. And I would actually study film beforehand. When you got to that level where you could study film, we did it in high school, but we would study film and look at what's their favorite move? What do they do? Even to the point where I used to write down the coaching tree of where that coach was 3 years before that and who they learned from. Because we all get tendencies. Even our coaches get their favorite blitz that they've borrowed from someone else that worked over the years. And so you look at those things and you look at who's the key guy that they blitz and all of that. So at certain levels, you could get to that point to where, hey, a guy sort of twitches his foot a certain way when he does this and another guy does that. When you get to that, you're pretty on. You understand all the little nuances. But then basically it's always triangles. You got to look at the triangles and to see everybody has to fill a gap. If you're an offense, there's a gap that somebody's responsible for. If a guy slants, another guy fills the gap. So as long as you can try to figure those out as it comes to play and your sets are accordingly, if you're running pass plays and things like that, it helps you out to be able to do that. And I was one of those guys, I used to write down in a book and then I'd go write film and I'd be like, okay, this guy, I take the guys I'm going to go against and I say, he does this when he slants inside. The guy behind him twitches when he does this, or the linebacker's up a yard when they do this. So I would take those notes and just write it down just so I could go through it. And then the night before I go to bed, we get our first 15 plays. I would go through those plays in my brain. I would go through my notes and see what their favorite things is. And once I went to bed the next morning, it was all saved and ready to go.
Wow. You mentioned you played with Joe Montana. And one of the things that I read in one of his books was he would go through his game week book and he would underline the reads. He would redraw the routes in his game week book. Was that something that you kind of picked up from a guy like that, or is it something that you did even before you got to the pro level?
It just sort of hit me to where I was like, when I write it down, I remember it better. I'm not a guy that can just sit here and like, okay, tell me what you're going to tell me and I can just spit it back to you. I want to write it down so I could go over it again and again and again so that I could prepare, because every week is going to be a little different and each guy is different. I mean, I have a 320 pounder one week and the next week I got a 280 guy that's going to wiggle in front of me and dance. So you have to figure out what they do and how they do it. So I would write it out so I could review it every day until we played. And then I'd put it away. But then when we played them again, I could pull it back out and go, what did they change from the last time we played? Or did they get a new D coordinator and where did they come from and who did they learn certain things from? Because the philosophies sort of go in patterns of, hey, I learned this from such and such. And guess what? They won 15 games in a row. They won this. They did that. So it becomes that roadmap piece. And you try to figure out who's swaying one way, who's doing another. Or they found, hey, this one guy just basically blows up every defense every time or every offense every time because he's a loose cannon. He just goes a million miles an hour. So you can't prepare for him, but you can't. You got to be prepared for the unprepared and then say, hey, make it happen after that. Guy was like that was Junior Seau. He was a guy that he studied film. He knew when the ball was going to snap. He hit certain gaps. I mean, I had a play where he rushed me. I had him. I threw him on the ground. He got up. He sprinted back and the ball got tipped. He got the interception and I ended up having to tackle him after that. It was just amazing some of the things that would happen in a game. And you're going, I just had this dude on the ground over here. Next thing you know, he's sprinting back and then he gets the interception. Then you got to go tackle him. And those are those guys that are hard to prepare for or the guys that can do everything from one stance. They never tip their hand. They never give it away. And that's those guys you just got to go, I got to fight. I've got to fight today and I got to figure it out as it goes along. And that's what's cool about understanding the different nuances of the game. And it comes down to your footwork, your hands, and I always say separate your hands from your feet, being able to know where your teammate is or what they can and can't do and what they struggle with. Because, hey, I want them to know what I struggle with. So when that play comes up, they're always looking over their shoulder just in case and vice versa. And I think that's what team is all about.
That's good stuff, man. Today's episode is presented by American Football IQ. One of the biggest challenges coaches face right now is this. Players are seeing more football than ever, but they are not always learning how to understand the game in full context. They watch clips, they see highlights, but they don't always learn how to recognize coverage, identify fronts, understand leverage, or connect what is happening before and after the snap. That is why tools that help teach football IQ matter. American Football IQ is built to help players learn the game visually through flashcards that train recognitions, coverages, fronts, protections, gap control, the kind of things players have to see faster if they want to play fast. This is not just about memorizing terms. It's about helping players recognize patterns quicker, process information faster, and play with more confidence when the ball is snapped. So whether you're coaching quarterbacks, skill guys, linemen, or just looking for a better way to teach the game, check out American Football IQ and see how they are helping players build real understanding that carries to the field. You can start with Volume 1 or get the full bundle at AmericanFootballIQ.com. There is also an online community that can be accessed on the AmericanFootballIQ.com website, where each flashcard has a video explaining it in more detail with film. Play fast. So you went from playing to mentoring young linemen through your foundation camps and the other projects you've been a part of. What's your first step? Like, do you quiz them really quick when you have somebody that you work with, on different defensive stunts or blitz paths, stuff like that? Do you quiz them to kind of see a baseline of what they know?
Well, I'm a learner first. So I'm going to learn from you as much as I can because it's new. Everybody's got a different style. Every coach has a new thing that they want to add. For a while there's the gallop step that everybody does compared to actually regular, attack steps. Now there's drop steps. And then there is, our favorite thing that everybody does is the reading as it goes, which makes it hard for linemen because they want you to block, but you can't go downfield. You can't, the RPOs and that kind of stuff. And that's a whole nother blocking scheme. So for me, it's first learning. I got to learn and absorb what you already know, where you're at, what you've already done, and what your coach is already teaching you, and then elaborate on top of that. I don't want to change you into what I do or how I do it, because what I do and what I did was different because it was in an East Coast offense. And I know that. And we were a downhill team. So our double teams are different than your double team. There wasn't a lot of RPOs. Ours was check with me. We're going to change the play from one to another, and we're going to run that other play. It's not we're going to run it while we're running it. We're not on it while it's on it. So I actually learned from them first. And then after I learned from them, I add little nuances for them to think about as they're doing what they're supposed to do. For my older guys, for my younger guys, I take them back to fundamentals. We go to footwork, hands. How do you put your hands on somebody? How do you get to a certain point? Actually, I've coached third, fourth, and fifth graders, and I sent 3 teams through all the way through 7th grade. And then after that, was like, yeah, we'll take some time off. And then we did it again. But to me, that was the most fun of watching them grow into it. And I think our guys just graduated last year as seniors, and there's still 4 or 5 of them that are going to play at the next level. But it's really cool to watch them grow. And it's funny, they go, well, can't you come with us? Because our coach doesn't coach the way you do. And I was like, nope. Got to go. You guys got to go and figure out what's next. But to me, that's the way it goes. You have to fundamentally build it up. And then once you get to the next level, figure out what they're already being coached, and then give them little nuggets to think about as they're being coached through their coaches. Because I never want to be that guy that was like, oh, he came to your camp and he came back to me. He's doing all these weird things and different things, because that's what coaches get afraid of. They're afraid you're going to mess up with all the work I've put into it. Where I'm a guy that's looking like, hey, I'm just trying to enhance what you've already put in place. So I need to know what your player knows. I need to know what they already use as their base, and then build on top of that of, have you ever thought about taking this hand and moving it here? Have you ever thought about, when you strike, don't lean too far over in the front because then you become top heavy. Have you ever figured out how to actually replace your hands more than grabbing and holding on for dear life? And it says just little things like that. So to me, that's what's really important about it, is adding little nuggets without affecting what the coaches are already putting in place. Because I don't want the coach to be like, oh, I can't believe you're going to work with that guy. It's like, well, look, I'm just going to add for what you already have. I'm not going to change it. I'm not going to say, oh, well, he's terrible and he doesn't know what he's doing, because he's your coach.
Absolutely. At the end of the day, we need people that want to work with kids and want to spend the time. And not everybody's going to have the same ability level as a coach. And I think that's a big thing. I always use the term, I'm a gap filler. I'm trying to fill the gaps, right? I want to know your baseline. What are you taught? Like I have some quarterbacks, for example, they're taught to take a pedal drop if they're throwing to the left, so their hips are already open, right? So it's like, that's different than the majority of programs. So I want to try to know that info and be able to be cogent in when I teach them on that. And, if there's anything else I could add, as they reset their feet, as they come through their progression, or as they escape the pocket or find the quiet part of the pocket, then I add some context and some color. But I love what you were saying, and ask them questions. I always try to find the root of issues as well. Like, what's the root cause, and say, hey, this is happening because you're overstriding or what have you. So yeah, it's good stuff.
That makes it easy on me, because then it's not, I'm going to start from scratch and be like, no, I want to know what you've already been taught and what you're being told. And what's cool about it is I like getting the guys in between combine and draft, because it's an open book. You haven't been taught anything yet. You've got to learn it all. So you got one coach that likes drop steps, one like attack step, one like this, one like that. So you got to be able to do it all. So when they come and walk in and go, have you ever did this before? Well, yeah, we've been working on that. Or simple fact that there's some guys that's never been in a 3-point stance. And I'm going, yeah, we got to work on that.
Yep. I mean, especially at that pro level. I mean, you got some people that are stuck in their ways as far as teaching, right? Things, the way that they look at the game and, they're scheme experts, but, when it comes to the technique, they probably, I think being able to give them a well-rounded approach is really good. We talked about you mentoring the young people, for instance. In regards to the type of work that you do, is there anything that you've specifically been involved in that you want to share?
Well, I work for the NFL, so I help guys transition in and out of the league. So I have all 32 teams of rookies that come in. I go to the combine every year and I sit with them. And I try to get, hey, guess what? My name is Will. I'm here. I played in the NFL. I'm here to help. Let me know, if you need anything or everything else. They're very focused on what they're doing, which I get. They're agents, their family, they're this, they're trying to get in and everything else. But more or less, I see them on their way in between midseason or when they're on their way out of the league. And that's when they're calling, hey, what can I do next? And where can I go? So my job is also to help them transition to the next thing of, we always know we got to transition next. And that's the hard part. When football's done, where do you go to next? So I work with guys after they're done or right when they're getting ready to transition out. And I try to tell them when they're playing, do something during your off season to help you transition out. Other words, try something different to try to figure out what's your next goal in life, because there's so much life left after football. Whether it's 3 years, 5 years, even 14 years, it doesn't matter. There's so much life after football that you're going to have to figure out what to do from that point. What's your purpose? What's your meaning? Not everybody's going to leave the game millionaires. That's definitely not going to happen, or have enough money to where they can't do anything. They I can go fishing for the rest of your life. No, you can't. You got to do other things in life that helps benefit others as well as benefit yourself. And I think that's that hard part, because you put a lot of time and spirit. Your parents, your family, whomever has supported you have put a lot of time to at least get you there. But on the way out, you should be able to try to help yourself to figure out what's next. And that transition will happen every year that you're out. You're trying to figure out what's next. It's not going to be like, oh, I went from here to this perfect job and I'm just doing this for the rest of my life. If it happens, that's great. But the majority of us have spent enough time with our hands in the sand and doing all that other stuff to where we got to figure it out. It takes a little time to go from that person, because we lose 10 to 15 years. If you play a long career, you lose that time in the actual real world, because we know as coaches, your time is always dictated by someone else.
Right. That's great work. I mean, you hear all the horror stories of people and, that they're ill-equipped to handle the next phase of their life because their decision making, off the field and, what they did with their money. That's a great service.
Think about the simple fact of, if you don't have someone that's ever made money around you that's willing to help educate you in that field,
Yeah.
you're not going to be able to handle it. You're not going to be able to just figure. I mean, some guys are really good at it. Some people have, I've got an uncle or a cousin or somebody that's very good. But then also you have somebody that's very bad at it. And you are 20, 21, 22. Well, now I could say 26, 27, 28, that you're looking for those external sources that are very hard. Yes, playing for the NFL is a great thing. Playing at the next level is an awesome thing. But there's also those other people that are praying and looking for those people too to take advantage of and to do different things. And that's that hard part of what you're trying to figure out and trying to do. And let us old guys that's already made mistakes and done all those different things and, restaurants and businesses and all of that, talk to those guys first and make sure that you don't fall in the pitfalls of what they've done and what they're doing. Some doing it great. Some of us got great partners, done great things, as those struggles. And we're a microcosm of what society is.
Very well said. I want to dive back into some football IQ stuff and kind of round it out with that. Football IQ is layered. It's spatial awareness, it's emotional control, pattern recognition, like multiple brains on the field. How do you teach that? I know you kind of dove into some of that already. Do you teach it through film, live reps, or trusting instincts when defenses throw a look at you that you hadn't prepared for?
I think it's a combination of all, because you might not have film work the first time you've ever seen it. Then you're hoping that you've put enough preparation into those players or their rules that get them out of trouble. And that's what you're hoping. Hey, I put rules in place to keep us from getting into trouble. Hey, if you do this, do that, do this, you'll be okay. And I can live with that. The other problem, though, is if you just totally freak out and go, okay, I don't know what to do, and I do nothing. So what we go is you fight your way out of it as a lineman. What we call is you figure it out. You fight your way as you go through. But if you can study film, that helps ease the burden because you might see it week in and week out. But then there's always those coaches that like to throw wrinkles on film on purpose just for you to practice it all week, and then you never see it again. But that is also part of the process. So you got to at least prepare for it because you've seen it, and that is something that's very important. So practice, preparation, rules to go by, because I think the more important piece as a person, as a coach, or as your player, you give them rules to go by and they go by their rules. As a coach, can you accept what happened? And I think that's what's really hard for that player, because if the coach can't accept what happened, then it doesn't help the player. Hey, I gave you a rule to do X, Y, and Z. You've done X, Y, and Z. They just did something better that we weren't prepared for. And to me, that's a sign of a great coach to be able to say those words. They did something we couldn't prepare you for, but you did the best you could to try to get us out of it. And then you sort of have to, snap and clear and then go to the next one and go, well, next time they do that, I've had time to think about it, reflect, and look at it. And this is what we probably should think about doing, and we can add it as a rule. So there was a lot of things that, as we're playing the game, rules change. Things get added. Oh, well, when this guy walks up into this gap, you do this. But if it's this guy number 45, we don't. And then you're going, well, why? That's my rule. Well, 45 usually doesn't blitz. He covers people. And so then you give me the rule. But then if I don't block him, will I get in trouble? And so that's where those rules come into effect of, no, we just block down all the time because then the quarterback knows he's hot off the guy off the edge. It just makes it cleaner and clearer. But what's really cool is that most of the time those arguments happened in the meeting rooms with the coaches. And then it comes out and everybody's made a decision and you go with it from that point. But the coach has still got to be that person to say, yeah, that was my fault. I fought for it and we did it this way and it didn't work, even though I really want to yell at you because I think you're athletic enough to fix it, and that's another piece of sometimes your players bail us out. They make us look better than we are. Be like, yeah, I taught him that. He was really, they were really good on that, even though you're going, man, I'm glad he moved left and did this and made it happen. And I think that's part of that understanding. You gotta do all of it to get it together because on the other hand, we all learn differently. Some guys can just see it and get it and understand it. I'm a guy that's got to write it down, research it, make sure it's there now. I can react and make it happen because there's been many things you make happen, but I know what the rules were to start with. And that's what helped me sort of figure out what to do next.
Man, that's really detailed. I mean, I think, you think of in these long yardage situations, or the third and medium to third and long, defenses are able to really dictate, right? How are you going to sort of protection, by having the 6 up or 5 up looks, mug backers, you're from film study, you've got your known rusher versus your unknown rusher. And, man, that's good. I mean, the coaches that really have their players back, the players are going to play harder for them, to your point, for sure. And, being able to have sound rules, but also have some empathy and then have some humility to where you're not just blaming players, I think is really critical for coaches.
And I get it. It's hard because you're going, I can't believe you missed that guy. It's like, well, coach, that's not really my rule, but then when you pick them up and you do it and you pick it up, you're like, great job of picking that up. And it's like, yeah, but that's not my rule. So then do I do it all the time? And they go, no, don't do it all the time. But that was great that you figured it out at that point.
Love it. I just saw a clip. I got 2 little quick examples, one in baseball, one in football. So I'll do the baseball one first. So Greg Maddux was known as like a scientist on the mound, right? Remember, he pitched against Jeff Bagwell and threw him, his team, Greg Maddux's team was up big in the regular season, and he threw him just a meatball, and that Bagwell crushed, right? Because he knew he was going to play him later in the playoffs. And so he kind of set him up with that good feeling. And then he ended up, like using that against them in the playoffs, and I like the game within the game is pretty cool. And then I was watching something and kind of came across my feed where Bill Parcells was talking about Lawrence Taylor. Lawrence Taylor on a specific play, his responsibility was to drop into coverage on a play. And he's like, Lawrence Taylor just rushed and sacked the quarterback. And then they ran it again. And then this time he rushed again and he created a strip sack and the ball hit the ground and they returned it for a touchdown. So Parcells is seething, but he's like, you know what? You didn't do what you're supposed to do. He said, I get it, coach. He's like, and he's like, we don't even have that in. He's like, well, we ought to put it in on Monday. I just thought that was, I think people being able to, coaches being able to understand, what players do best and, having those base rules, really good. We're kind of up against time here. I wanted to ask you just kind of a light question. What's a funny story that you could tell us about? You played with Hall of Fame players. You're a Hall of Famer yourself. You've been around some great coaches. What's maybe a funny story that you could share with us?
Well, I think, one of the funniest stories is, the Joe Montana stuff when he, is looking up in the stands and he's, sees famous people and he was like, man, that's such and such up there. And, and you're just like, man, aren't you focused on the field of what's going on? He was that guy that just noticed everything as it went around him and saw it. And to me, that was one of those, cool things as far as how relaxed he could be on the field. And when he came in the huddle and he goes, okay, I need a little time, you knew something special was going to happen. He saw something that nobody else saw. And to me, that was one of the coolest things to be able to say you were in that room when he comes in and goes, oh yeah, I see something that nobody else can see and we can make that happen. The other part of it is that there's always a funny story when, you ever seen those movies where the player, football movie where a guy gives a heartfelt speech about, we're going to go back, we're going to come back, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do this. And as football coaches, you're always thinking, yeah, that never happens really. The coach will give a great, speech, but it's not, brimstone and you're going to do this. And I had one of those moments my rookie year where my center gave a speech where, he tells his history about him being a kid from South Chicago and all he ever wanted to do was win a Super Bowl. And I am going, this guy is crazy. He has lost his mind in the middle of a game. I was like, this is my rookie year. I was like, is this what it's going to be like every year? And we ended up coming back and winning the game. It was in Houston. And it was one of those moments to where I'll never forget, Tim Grinhart sitting in the middle of the field yelling at us about digging deep and getting this done and everything else. And we ended up winning the game. And I was like, man, that was one of those moments to where, motivation happened. And it's, one of those changing points where you're going, okay, it does happen. It can happen.
Yeah. That's awesome. Love that. Last question. I think this is an important question. So you live in Kansas City, spent a lot of time there. I could name some spots that I've been to there, but you're the expert. What's the spot in Kansas City?
Kansas City barbecue, right? That's what you're asking me about? Most people I ask them, I said, first of all, you got to tell, like I said, I do research, man. I'm going to ask the question, what kind of rib do you want? What kind do you like vinegar sauce? Do you don't? Do you do this and that? But you're going to ask me what's my favorite? And for me, there used to be a place called Hayward's Barbecue, and it's actually Kevin's father-in-law who started it back in the 70s, and it was one of my favorite places. Right now, the hot one in Kansas City is Q39. Everybody goes there. If you're going for historically, Gates is historically Ollie Gates and that family. If you're going to go into the neighborhoods, as I called it, you'll go to Slaps. Arthur Bryant's is good. And I usually go to Jack Stack's because it's closer to the house. And then, of course, there's Casey Joe's, where it used to be called Oklahoma Joe's, and they changed the name because, they didn't want Oklahoma to be called the same in KC. But those right there are pretty much right now, as far as I say, the top 6 or 7 spots for if you want barbecue in Kansas City.
What's your go-to side?
Go-to side? That's a hard one right now because, I do like mac and cheese, man. If I could pull it off, mac and cheese would be great, but probably beans right now. I do the beans. Beans more than anything.
Well, I'm going to have to go find a barbecue spot. It's not going to be like that. We got good Mexican food out here in San Diego,
Yeah.
but the barbecue, man, love it. But Will, I appreciate your time, man. You've always been really good to me. I learned a lot, and not surprised that I learned a lot. You could see anybody that's successful in their field and anybody who's reached the pinnacle that you have, being a Hall of Famer. There's always tricks of the trade, and really it's not anything too magical. It's about work and it's about creating patterns. So I really appreciate you, Will, and look forward to talking to you soon again.
No problem, man. Thanks a lot. Have a good one.
Thanks for joining us for Football IQ presented by American Football IQ. If you want to help your players see the game better, think faster, and understand more, go check out American Football IQ and what they're building for players, coaches, and parents. That's at AmericanFootballIQ.com or click the link in the description. Follow all we're doing at Coach and Coordinator Network and follow us on X at Coach K. Grabowski.